I spent $50,000 on my daughter's wedding. Every dime came from me. The dress, the flowers, the food, the music. And then, 12 hours before she was supposed to walk down the aisle, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "I forgot to add you to the invitation list. Just stay back." I smiled, nodded, and told her, "Okay, baby." The next morning, while she posed for pictures and cut her cake, my phone stayed silent, but hers didn't. By the time the day was over, she had 105 missed calls, and not one of them was answered. This is no fairy tale. I decided to share my real story through this channel, since I heard others talking about theirs too. So stay with me and let me know where you are watching from. My name is Clarissa Monroe. And if you want to understand why I did what I did, you need to start at the beginning, long before the wedding, long before the betrayal, back to when it was just me and my little girl against the world. I was 27 when Alana's father walked out. No goodbye, no plan, no support. Just me holding a baby on my hip, staring at an empty doorway, and realizing that if she was ever going to have a chance at life, I would have to be both mother and father. I worked jobs most people wouldn't touch, cleaning, waiting tables, hauling trays, until I managed to scrape together enough to start my own catering business. It began with a few rented chairs, secondhand cookware, and a tiny kitchen that smelled permanently of fried onions and bleach. But I poured myself into it. Every wedding, birthday, and funeral I catered was a stepping stone. And while I hustled, I raised Alana to believe she was special. I gave her the best I could afford, clothes that looked better than my bank account, schools that stretched me thin, and dreams bigger than anything I'd been handed. When her classmates had designer bags, I found ways to buy knockoffs, so she wouldn't feel less than. When she wanted piano lessons, I bartered free catering for practice time. People told me I was spoiling her, but I thought I was protecting her from the hunger, the shame, the smallness I had grown up with. By the time she was in high school, Alana had the kind of polish I never did. She was smart, strikingly beautiful, and ambitious. And I was proud, too proud to see the entitlement curling at the edges. She didn't just want things. She expected them. She didn't just love me. She depended on me like a bank that never closed. And I let it happen. I told myself it was what mothers were supposed to do. Of course, I wasn't completely alone. My younger sister, Vanessa, was my anchor through all of it. She lived up in New Jersey most of the year, but she never missed a chance to remind me to stand tall, to not let Alana take advantage of me. "You're raising a queen," she'd say, "but don't let her forget the crown sits on your head first." I laughed those words off, because how could I imagine my own daughter turning against me? And then there was Malik, Vanessa's son, my nephew. That boy grew up in my house every summer, and he saw things others didn't. He'd sit at the kitchen table, wide-eyed, watching me stretch $1 into dinner for $3. He knew what it meant when I stayed up late balancing books, and he'd tease me for always falling asleep with invoices on my lap. Malik respected the grind. In a way, he was the only one who truly understood how much of my soul I poured into keeping our family afloat. Still, no matter how many warnings I got, I kept giving. When Alana needed braces, I took on double shifts. When she wanted to join a cheerleading squad that cost more than my rent, I found a way. College tuition, loans in my name. Graduation trip, I emptied my savings. Every milestone in her life had my fingerprints all over it. and I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor. But here's the cruel truth about giving too much. The more you hand over, the less people see it as sacrifice, and the more they see it as duty. By the time Alana graduated college, she didn't just thank me for what I did. She expected it. The girl who once ran to me with hugs now rolled her eyes if I couldn't keep up with her wants. She was no longer just my daughter. She was becoming someone I didn't fully recognize. I told myself it was just a phase. Kids grow up, they change, they push away before they come back. I convinced myself that all my giving was an investment, that one day she'd understand what it cost me, and she'd love me harder for it. But I was wrong. See, the seeds of betrayal don't show themselves overnight. They grow slowly, watered by pride, entitlement, and influence. And I had been watering Alana's for years without realizing it. By the time she brought Jordan Wells home, the polished son of a wealthy contractor family, I should have seen what was coming. But in those days, I was still blinded by love, still foolish enough to think all my sacrifices would protect me from the one truth I never wanted to face. Sometimes the people you give everything to are the same ones who will take the knife and twist it deepest. I didn't know it then, but the wedding wasn't the first betrayal. It was just the one that finally forced me to open my eyes. When Alana told me she was engaged, I should have been overjoyed. Every mother dreams of that moment. Her daughter's hand flashing a diamond, her voice trembling with excitement. But when I saw the ring on Alana's finger and the smug smile on Jordan Wells's face, my heart didn't leap. It tightened. Jordan came from money, the kind of money that walks into a room and expects the air to rearrange itself. His family owned one of the largest construction companies in the state, Wells and Sons, and they carried that reputation like royalty. The first time I met him, he shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and the way he looked at Alana, it wasn't love I saw. It was possession. Still, Alana was glowing. She told me Jordan was everything she ever wanted, ambitious, successful, connected. She kept repeating the word connected, like that was supposed to impress me. I smiled, hugged her, and congratulated them both. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, he doesn't see her as a partner. He sees her as an accessory. Meeting his family confirmed it. Dolores Wells, his mother, was the kind of woman who could cut you with a compliment. She welcomed me into their sprawling estate with a smile so polished it gleamed, but her words dripped with condescension. So, you're the one who raised Alana, she said as though she'd expected less. You must be proud. Catering, wasn't it? That must be demanding. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Like my life's work was a hobby, like the hundreds of sleepless nights and double shifts I endured to keep my business alive were nothing compared to the effortless comfort she floated on. And all the while, Alana sat at her side, nodding, laughing at their jokes, eager to prove she belonged. Howard Wells, Jordan's father, was quieter but no less dismissive. He asked about my business, but his questions weren't curious. They were laced with judgment. Do you handle larger events? Corporate galas? Political fundraisers? I told him I specialized in weddings and private events. He nodded, unimpressed, before moving on to discuss golf with Jordan. But it was Dolores who made her position clear. At dinner, she laid her hand on Alana's arm and said, "Now, darling, a Wells wedding is not just about two people. It's about legacy. Presentation matters. We'll handle the important details. You just enjoy being the bride." And just like that, she positioned herself as the architect of my daughter's future, while I was reduced to a footnote. I looked at Jordan, waiting for him to defend Alana, to push back, to remind his mother that this was their day. But he didn't. He just leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly, sipping his wine, like it was all going according to plan. On the ride home that night, I asked Alana what she thought. She brushed it off with a laugh. "Mom, that's just how they are. You can't take it personally. They're used to a certain standard, that's all." A certain standard. As if I hadn't spent my life fighting to give her one. As if the food on their plates, the roof over her head, the braces in her mouth, and the tuition that kept her in school didn't count. It stung, but I swallowed it the way I always did. When the engagement party rolled around, I noticed something else. My name wasn't on the invitations. It was presented as if the Wells family alone were hosting the event. Guests I'd never met shook my hand politely and then drifted away to fawn over Dolores. I was invisible in a room I should have shown in. That night, Vanessa called me. She could hear the weariness in my voice, and she didn't hold back. "Clarissa, don't you see what's happening? They're erasing you. Slowly, carefully, but it's happening. You paid for her smile, her education, her entire future. And now you're letting them treat you like you're the help." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because Vanessa was right. And Malik, sharp-eyed Malik, had noticed too. He pulled me aside after the party and said, "Annie, they don't respect you. Don't let them keep doing this. Don't let them push you out of your own daughter's life." I smiled at him, patted his cheek, and told him not to worry. But inside, my heart was aching, because deep down, I already felt it, the shift. Alana was no longer mine. She was theirs, and the Wells family had no intention of sharing her with me. Looking back now, that was the beginning of the end. The proposal wasn't just about Alana saying yes to Jordan. It was about her saying yes to the Wells, yes to their status, yes to a life where I didn't fit. I should have seen it then, but I didn't. I told myself I'd endure it for her happiness. What I didn't know was that this was only the first step in a long, calculated effort to push me out entirely. When people hear $50,000, they think of cars, down payments, even a house in some places. For me, it was years of sweat turned into a number, savings I had scraped together penny by penny, and credit lines I swore I'd never touch again. That's what I poured into my daughter's wedding. And every dime had my name written on it. The Wells family didn't lift a finger when it came to the money. Not Howard with his big contracts, not Dolores with her manicured nails, not even Jordan, the groom himself. They stood tall in their wealth, but didn't peel back a single dollar to contribute. The unspoken rule was clear. Clarissa will handle it. She always does. And I did. I drained my accounts. I liquidated a small emergency fund I'd been building. I even took out a personal loan against my catering business, telling myself it was temporary, that once Alana was married, life would settle. The ledger became my diary. Deposits, withdrawals, vendor fees, deposits for florists, down payments for the venue. Each line was another piece of me being chipped away. The dress alone was $8,000. Imported lace, hand-stitched beading, the kind of gown brides in magazines wear. I hesitated when I saw the price tag, but Alana twirled in it with such delight, and Dolores clapped her hands like a queen approving her successor. I signed the check. The venue, $20,000 for the Wells estate, and the staff to transform it into something fit for a royal event. The catering, 12,000. And yes, it burned me that even as a caterer myself, my daughter didn't want my company handling it. "It's nothing personal, Mom," she said, "but Jordan's friends expect a certain standard." That standard came with a bill double what I would have charged. I swallowed my pride and paid it. Flowers, band, photography, the numbers stacked up until I could hardly breathe. $50,000. I said it over and over in my head like a curse. $50,000 that represented my retirement, my safety net, my years of sacrifice. And yet, when the contracts were signed, whose name was on every dotted line, mine, my signature bound the venue, my card held the catering, my checks guaranteed the band would play. My money made the Wells legacy shine. Without me, there was no wedding. But here's the part that stung worse than the debt. I was being erased from the process, even as I paid for it. The planners took calls from Alana and Dolores, not me. Decisions were made without my voice. Colors were chosen, menus adjusted, timelines set. And I found out after the fact. Vendors who only knew me as the one who pays started deferring to Dolores's instructions, as if she were the true host. At one meeting with the florist, I sat quietly as Alana and Dolores debated rose versus orchid arrangements. The florist never once asked my opinion, even though the receipt would have my name on it. I wanted to say something to remind them this was my money, my daughter, my event. But the words stuck in my throat. I just smiled, pulled out my checkbook, and signed. It wasn't just about flowers or food. It was about being invisible, about realizing that while my money mattered, I did not. And that realization cut deeper than any overdraft notice ever could. Vanessa noticed the change immediately. "Clarissa," she said one night on the phone, "you're paying for a wedding you're not even invited to plan. That's not right." Malik, standing nearby, chimed in, "Auntie, you're financing your own erasure." They were right. But at the time, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself what mattered was Alana's happiness, her shining day, her perfect start. I convinced myself that mothers are supposed to give until it hurts. But sitting here now, I can tell you there's a difference between giving and being bled dry. And by the time the final payment cleared, I wasn't just drained of money. I was drained of dignity. I didn't know it then, but every check I wrote, every loan I signed, every signature I scrawled was building the stage for my own humiliation. I thought I was paying for my daughter's dream, but what I was really doing was buying the rope they would try to hang me with. There's a kind of pain that doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up in the way people stop looking at you when decisions are being made, the way your name disappears from papers, the way rooms go quiet when you enter because you no longer matter. That's what it felt like as the wedding plans moved forward. I was the one paying for it, yet somehow I became the outsider. Meetings with vendors no longer included me. At first, it was subtle. A florist would send updates directly to Alana. The band emailed Dolores instead of me. Then it became blatant. One afternoon, I showed up at the planner's office only to be told, "Oh, they met yesterday, Dolores, and Alana handled the details." My daughter hadn't even mentioned it. The programs arrived weeks later. I flipped through the glossy print, my heart racing with pride, until I saw the hosts listed. "Mr. and Mrs. Howard Wells cordially invite you." My name wasn't there. Not as host. not even in a footnote. I stared at the page for so long it blurred. I had poured $50,000 into this event, and I couldn't even find myself in the fine print. When I called Alana, she brushed it off. "Mom, it's not that serious. Nobody reads those details. Don't make it a big deal." But it was her tone that cut deeper, sharp, dismissive, like Dolores had already trained her to look down at me. She had started parroting their language. "They just have a certain way of doing things," she said. "We need to keep up appearances." Appearances. That word haunted me, because appearances were what I'd fought my whole life to protect her from: the appearance of being poor, of being less than, of not belonging. And now she was using that same word to justify erasing me. I tried to ignore it, but Vanessa wasn't having it. She flew down one weekend, and the moment she saw the invitations, she slammed the box shut. "Clarissa, this isn't an oversight. This is intentional. They are pushing you out." Her voice shook with anger, but mine was quiet. She's my daughter. She wouldn't do that to me. But Vanessa didn't back down. "Wake up. This isn't Alana anymore. This is the Wells talking through her mouth. And you're letting them rewrite you out of her story." Malik was listening too, his eyes burning with the kind of clarity only the young have. "Auntie, you're invisible to them. But if they think they can erase you, they don't know who they're messing with." I smiled at him, trying to ease the tension. But deep inside, I knew Vanessa was right. Every week that passed, I became less and less part of the wedding. The caterer didn't consult me when they changed the menu from what I'd agreed to something more refined. The photographer emailed Dolores to arrange schedules. The seating chart, I wasn't even shown a copy. It was as if the event had grown so big, so polished, that I no longer fit into its frame. And Alana, my own daughter, didn't fight it. She joined in. She laughed with Dolores about Mom's old-fashioned taste. She told vendors to call her directly because my mother's too busy. She even joked once that I might show up with plastic tablecloths if left to my own devices. Her words, her tone, her distance, they weren't the daughter I raised. They were the Wells daughter now. I swallowed my pride every time. I told myself it didn't matter, that mother's sacrifice. But in the quiet moments, the truth pressed down like a weight. I was funding my own erasure. And Vanessa was right. It wasn't by accident. It was deliberate, a slow, careful effort to make sure that when the day finally came, the Wells would stand tall as the perfect hosts, Alana would shine as their polished bride, and I'd be nothing more than the woman who paid the bills. It was Malik who heard it first. My nephew had always been the type to hang back, quiet enough that people forgot he was in the room. That night, he was in the hallway at the Wells estate, waiting for Alana to finish a call so they could head out for dinner. He told me later he wasn't even trying to listen. The words just cut through the air like glass. "I don't want her there." Alana snapped, her voice low but sharp. "I don't care if she paid for it. I'll die before I let my mother embarrass me in front of Jordan's people." When Malik repeated those words to me, I froze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt the floor shift under me, as if my whole world had tilted. My daughter, my only child, the same girl I carried on my back when buses didn't run, the girl whose braces I paid for with money meant for my rent, the girl who wore dresses bought on my knees in back rooms of consignment shops. That girl had stood in a house paid for by someone else's money and dismissed me as an embarrassment. But when Malik's face burned with anger and his voice rose, I shushed him. You must have misunderstood. I said quickly, my chest tight. She would never say that. Auntie, I heard it, he insisted. His fists were clenched, his whole body rigid. She doesn't want you there. She said it plain. Vanessa was standing nearby, and she didn't let me squirm away. Clarissa, don't do this, she said. Don't cover your ears just because it's your child. That girl is lost in the Wells world, and if you don't wake up, you're going to be left outside of the very wedding you're paying for. I shook my head, clinging to denial like it was a lifeline. No, she stressed. Weddings make people say things they don't mean. She doesn't understand the weight of her words. But Vanessa's voice cut sharper. Stop making excuses. This isn't stress. This is choice. She is choosing them over you. I wanted to argue, but my mouth was dry. Deep down, a part of me knew my sister and nephew were right. I had felt the chill in Alana's laughter, the way she rolled her eyes when I gave opinions, the quickness with which she deferred to Dolores. But admitting it out loud felt like betrayal against my own child. So instead, I folded my arms and said, she's my daughter. She'll come around. Vanessa stared at me for a long moment, her eyes full of pity and frustration. Clarissa, love is blind, but motherhood can be deadly blind. Don't let it cost you everything. That night, I lay in bed, Malik's words echoing in my head. I'll die before I let my mother embarrass me. The sentence replayed over and over, each time sharper, each time cutting deeper. I wanted to forget it, to believe it was a mistake, to cling to the fantasy that all my sacrifices still meant something. But the truth was there, heavy as a stone in my chest. Alana wasn't just drifting away. She was pushing me out. I didn't know it then, but that whisper, that cruel, thoughtless sentence Malik overheard, was the warning shot, the one I ignored, the one that told me exactly what was coming. And by ignoring it, I gave my daughter the rope she needed to finish tying the noose around me. The night before the wedding, I was sitting at my kitchen table, receipts and contracts spread out like scars. I'd been staring at the numbers for hours, letting the silence of my house weigh on me. That's when I heard a knock at the door. It was Alana, my daughter, glowing in the soft light of the porch, hair swept back, nails freshly done, her entire body humming with the energy of a bride-to-be. For a split second, I felt that old swell of pride. My baby is getting married tomorrow. She stepped inside, and the air changed. She didn't sit. She didn't even take off her coat. She stood there, perfectly poised, as if she'd rehearsed what she was about to say. Mom, she began, her voice smooth, too smooth. I need to talk to you about tomorrow. I nodded, waiting. Her eyes flickered, but her tone didn't falter. I forgot to add you to the invitation list. The words didn't land all at once. They hovered in the air, soft and casual, like a stone dropped into deep water. I think, she continued, it's best if you just stay back. There are going to be a lot of people, and I don't want you overwhelmed. Okay, baby. Okay, baby. She said it like a joke, like she was the parent, and I was the child. My chest tightened. My ears rang, but I didn't let it show. I just smiled. A small, tired smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals. All right, I whispered. Okay. She looked relieved, as though she had expected a fight. But I didn't give her one. She kissed my cheek lightly, the way you might kiss a stranger in greeting, and she left, just like that. 12 hours before her wedding. The wedding I had built with my blood and my bones. My daughter had cut me out. When the door closed, I sat back down at the table. My hands trembled as I picked up the nearest receipt. The dress, $8,000. The venue, $20,000. The catering, the flowers, the music, line after line of sacrifice staring back at me. My signature was everywhere. My name was on every contract. My money was the reason tomorrow would shine. And yet, I wasn't welcome. The devastation pressed in hard, but I didn't cry. Not a single tear. I sat in that silence, letting the words replay in my head. I forgot to add you. Stay back. Okay, baby. That was the moment something inside me shifted. All the years of sacrifice, all the excuses I'd made, all the warnings I'd ignored, they collided into one sharp, clear truth. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was disposable. And that was the last time I ever let my daughter see me as weak. I didn't argue that night. I didn't beg. I didn't even raise my voice. But deep down, behind the smile and the silence, a storm had already begun. After Alana left, I sat in silence for what felt like hours. The clock on the wall ticked, but the sound barely registered. I stared at the piles of paper spread across the table, contracts, invoices, receipts, all stamped with my name, my signature, my money. They weren't just documents. They were proof. Proof of everything I had poured into a wedding I was no longer allowed to attend. At first, the grief came heavy. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the part of me that still believed in loyalty. My hands shook when I picked up the contract for the florist. I remembered standing in that shop, watching Alana and Dolores debate roses versus orchids while I sat quietly in the corner, ignored, and still I had signed. I remembered the look on the planner's face when I pulled out my card. Not gratitude, not even respect, just expectation. I was the one who paid. That was my role. I laid those memories beside the receipts, and they cut deeper than the numbers ever could. But grief doesn't last forever. After a while, it thins out, and something else takes its place. For me, that something was calculation. I began picking through the contracts line by line, the way I used to comb through invoices late at night when I was fighting to keep my business alive. My eyes traced over every clause, every name. Venue, under my account. Catering, secured with my credit line. Band, pending final payment. Florist, installment due that morning. Photographer, balance outstanding. It was all tied to me. Me. And if I built it, I could take it apart. The thought came slowly at first, like a whisper I wasn't sure I heard. But the more I read, the louder it grew. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't at their mercy. They had locked me out of the wedding, but the truth was I still held the keys. So I picked up the phone. The florist was first. I told them there had been a change, that the final payment wouldn't be coming through. They hesitated, but money speaks louder than apologies. Without payment, deliveries don't happen. One arrangement unraveled. Then the band. I asked about their balance. When they confirmed it hadn't cleared yet, I told them to cancel. They protested, but my name was on the contract. My money, my call. The caterer was trickier, bigger operation, bigger fee, but I knew their terms. Without final clearance, they had no obligation to serve. I told them to pull back. Each call steadied me. Each vendor I untangled was another thread yanked from the fabric of a wedding that had been woven without me. By the time I hung up the phone the third time, my grief had sharpened into something else entirely. Resolve. It wasn't rage, not exactly. Rage burns fast, and I wasn't interested in flames. This was colder, methodical, like a surgeon cutting out rot. I wasn't just pulling out payments. I was pulling out power. The stack of papers that had mocked me hours before now looked different. They weren't reminders of humiliation. They were weapons, tools, evidence that this wedding only existed because of me. And if I was being erased, then so would everything I'd built. By dawn, I was exhausted but not broken. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt steady. I sat back, looking at the contracts spread across the table, and whispered to myself, let's see how they do this without me. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even anger. It was a promise, a quiet vow made in the dead of night. And when morning came, the Wells estate would wake up to a day they'd never forget. The morning of the wedding, I didn't move from my couch. My phone sat on the coffee table, face down, while sunlight spilled across the room. I could picture it all in my mind. The Wells estate buzzing like a beehive, guests in satin dresses and polished shoes, photographers snapping the manicured lawns, Alana slipping into her gown, while Dolores preened like the queen of it all. From the outside, it must have looked perfect, but I knew better. The unraveling began quietly, almost politely. The florist's truck never arrived. By the time guests started pulling up in sleek cars, there were only a handful of arrangements set on the tables, the ones ordered weeks before. No grand archway, no cascading orchids down the staircase, no flower wall for photographs. Just gaps, empty vases. The first whisper slipped through the crowd. Wasn't this supposed to be a luxury wedding? Then the band. They showed up, all right, but only to collect their equipment. I imagined the look on Dolores's face when the musicians packed up their instruments before playing a single note. A DJ had been scrambled in at the last second, but his tinny speakers couldn't compete with the roar of 300 restless guests. The music faltered, cracked, sputtered. Another whisper spread. Didn't they pay for a full orchestra? And then the caterer. That was the breaking point. The staff began setting up trays, but without clearance of payment, half the menu never left the kitchen. The servers whispered to one another, then walked out, leaving silverware stacked neatly on tables with nothing to accompany it. Guests sat waiting for meals that would never come. By noon, the estate was vibrating with chaos. Dolores's composure slipped. I could see her in my mind's eye, heels clicking against the marble floor, barking orders at planners who shrugged helplessly. Alana's voice, sharp and panicked, cutting through the hum of guests. Jordan pacing, phone in hand, trying to fix a problem he couldn't even understand. And still, the guests arrived, hundreds of them, dressed for spectacle but greeted by empty tables, wilting flowers, and a soundtrack that cracked like an old radio. They came expecting to be impressed, but instead they found confusion. And confusion breeds gossip. The whispers grew louder, turning into laughter behind manicured hands. I didn't need to be there to know exactly how it felt for Alana. Every bride wants her wedding remembered, but not like this. Not as the day vendors walked out mid-event. Not as the day her in-laws' standard crumbled under their own arrogance. At one point, the power flickered. The rented lights that were supposed to bathe the estate in a soft glow sputtered out. plunging half the courtyard into dimness before returning with a harsh buzz. Someone clapped sarcastically, and the laughter rippled. Guests began pulling out their phones, recording the spectacle. Meanwhile, my own phone began to buzz. One call, then another. I didn't pick up. I sat there in my living room, the hum of silence louder than any ringtone. Each vibration was proof. The cracks had widened. The unraveling had begun. By mid-afternoon, the Wells' perfect wedding was anything but. The vendors they had leaned on had evaporated, the staff they trusted had abandoned them, and the whispers had turned into ridicule. Dolores's reputation, Alana's pride, Jordan's composure. All of it was collapsing in real time. And me, I simply sat back, hands folded in my lap, letting it happen. For once in my life, I didn't rush in to fix things. I didn't smooth over the cracks. I let them split wide open because I had built this day with my hands, and now I was tearing it apart with my silence. This was only the beginning. By early afternoon, the whispers had grown teeth. What started as polite murmurs over half-empty tables became laughter sharp enough to cut. Guests leaned into one another. Phones lifted discreetly, recording the kind of disaster people talk about long after the last champagne flute is cleared away. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I knew those circles. I'd catered enough events to recognize how quickly high society turns on itself when things fall apart. One moment, you're admired. The next, you're ridiculed. And on that day, it wasn't just a wedding collapsing. It was the Wells' reputation, right in front of the people whose opinions they valued most. The food never arrived. Servers walked out, leaving trays covered in linens like tombstones. Guests who had expected a 5-course meal were left chewing on cocktail nuts and bitter complaints. Someone cracked a joke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. $50,000 and not a single entree. Laughter followed, cruel and unrestrained. The flowers wilted in the sun. Without the grand displays, the estate looked barren. Corners meant for photographs were bare. The archway where Alana had planned to stand empty except for a few scattered stems. Guests pointed, snickered, whispered words like cheap and unprepared. And then the music faltered again. The DJ's speakers screeched, feeding back so loud that guests covered their ears. When the system cut out completely, the silence was worse. In that silence, I imagined the sound of voices rising, Dolores snapping at planners, Jordan barking into his phone, Alana choking on the realization that perfection had slipped through her fingers. Alana, my daughter. She had spent months dreaming of this moment, walking down the aisle radiant in white, admired by everyone, the Wells name lifting her higher than she'd ever stood before. And yet what she got was something entirely different. Her gown may have sparkled, but humiliation clung to her like a veil no one could remove. Instead of admiration, she was met with pity, judgment, and the cruel delight of people watching a spectacle unravel. Guests whispered behind their hands, "Isn't that the Wells family? Didn't they promise something grand?" Others shook their heads in mock sympathy. All that money, and this is what they get. It wasn't just Alana's day that was crumbling. It was Dolores's social standing, Howard's reputation, Jordan's credibility, all of it collapsing in real time under the weight of their arrogance. And through it all, my phone buzzed. Again and again. Calls from Alana, from planners, from numbers I didn't recognize. One after another, stacking up like waves crashing on a shore I refused to step onto. I didn't answer a single one. My silence echoed louder than any words I could have spoken, because humiliation isn't always about what's said. Sometimes it's about what isn't. Sometimes it's the absence that cuts deepest. The missing flowers, the missing meals, the missing music, the missing mother. By the time the ceremony limped toward its end, the gossip had already cemented. The Wells standard was nothing more than a punchline, and Alana's perfect wedding would forever be remembered as the day everything went wrong. And me, I stayed in my living room, calm, steady, unreachable. For once, I wasn't the fixer, the rescuer, the one who cleaned up the mess. I let the mess stand. I let it spread. I let them choke on it, because that was the real revenge. Not just the collapse of the wedding, but the knowledge that I could have saved it and chose not to. By the time the sun began to set on what was supposed to be the grandest day of my daughter's life, my phone looked like a battlefield. Missed call after missed call stacked on the screen. Unknown numbers, the wedding planner, Jordan, even Dolores. But most of all, Alana, my daughter. The first call came just after noon. Then another and another, each one more desperate, more frantic than the last. By mid-afternoon, the screen wouldn't stay dark for more than a minute before buzzing again. By evening, the number had climbed so high I stopped counting. When I finally flipped the phone over and looked, the total stared back at me, 105 missed calls. 105. I didn't answer a single one. I could picture it clearly, even without being there. Alana slipping away from her guests, ducking into a side room with her gown bunched in her fists, mascara smudged, phone pressed to her ear. Dolores beside her, hissing into her own phone, trying to wrangle caterers, vendors, anyone who could explain why everything was falling apart. Jordan pacing, voice low and furious, demanding answers he couldn't get. And through it all, their solution was the same. Call me. Because deep down, they knew the truth. The wedding didn't collapse because of bad luck. It didn't crumble because of poor planning. It fell apart because the one person who built it refused to hold it up anymore. But I had nothing left to say. For years, I'd answered every call, fixed every crisis, patched every hole in Alana's life. I was the one who stayed up late to balance the numbers, who found a way to make ends meet, who sacrificed myself so she could shine. And this time, I chose silence. Silence was my answer. Silence was my weapon. Silence was revenge. I imagined the panic in her voice as she left those voicemails. The way her tone shifted from commanding to pleading, from angry to broken. Mom, please, we need you. Just tell us what happened. Mom, fix this. Please, Mom. But each plea met the same fate, ignored. My phone remained face down on the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. For once, I wasn't her savior. I wasn't the solution. I wasn't the woman who gave everything without asking for respect in return. I let her drown in the weight of her choices. When the night finally ended, when the last guest left the Wells estate shaking their heads and laughing about the disaster they had witnessed, my phone was still buzzing. Alana's perfect wedding had become a cautionary tale, and I hadn't lifted a finger. 105 missed calls. That number burned into my mind like a brand. Not one of them answered. Not one of them returned. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't what you do. It's what you refuse to do. And I refused to save her. By dawn, the chaos of the wedding had quieted, but what was left behind was worse than the event itself. The guests were gone, their laughter and gossip already traveling through Raleigh like wildfire. The estate was littered with half-set tables, discarded programs, and flowers wilting in buckets that had never been displayed. But the worst of it wasn't the scene. It was the fallout. The vendors wanted their money, and they wanted it now. By the time the sun rose, Dolores's phone was buzzing with angry calls. The florist demanded final payment before they would release the remainder of the flowers still sitting in their shop. The band, furious at being canceled, threatened legal action over breach of contract. The caterer, insulted and unpaid, sent their invoice directly to the Wells estate with the words "immediate payment required" stamped across the top. Every contract bore my signature, but without my money clearing the balances, the responsibility slid onto them. For the first time, the Wells family couldn't throw their name around to make the problem disappear. Inside those walls, voices rose. Dolores turned on Alana first. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You relied on your mother. You let her handle everything. You let her put her name on all the contracts. Now look at us." Alana, still in her gown from the night before, mascara streaked across her face, fired back. "Don't you dare blame me. You wanted control. You insisted on handling every detail. You told me she was too small, too simple to be involved, and I listened to you." Howard tried to play mediator, but his voice was drowned out. Jordan, standing off to the side, watched it all unravel. His face wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something worse, doubt. The kind of doubt that eats at a man's pride, that whispers maybe he'd made a mistake. Because in Jordan's world, reputation was everything, and the Wells name had taken a hit no amount of money could repair. The wedding wasn't remembered for elegance or grandeur. It was remembered as a circus, and standing at the center of it was his bride, the woman who had promised to elevate him, but instead had humiliated him in front of everyone he respected. Dolores paced, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. "Our family has never looked so foolish," she spat. "Do you know what people are saying? That we're cheap, that we couldn't even pull off a wedding. That's not just embarrassing. Alana, that's fatal." Alana crumbled onto the couch, sobbing. "Mom won't answer. She's ignoring me." Jordan's jaw tightened. He muttered, "Maybe she should," before walking out of the room. That sentence, I imagine, landed heavier than any of Dolores's insults. Because it wasn't just me who had gone silent. It was Jordan, too. The man she married less than 24 hours earlier was already pulling away, already questioning whether the disaster he had stood in was worth the cost. And me, I sat in my quiet living room, the morning sun warming my face, sipping coffee I brewed for myself. My phone was still heavy with unanswered calls, my heart steady for the first time in years. They had their disaster. They had their public humiliation. But this was only the beginning. Weddings end in one day. Legacies last much longer. And I wasn't done rewriting mine. The morning after the wedding, my phone was finally silent. No more buzzing. No more pleading voicemails, no more desperate numbers flashing across the screen. It was as though the storm had blown itself out, leaving behind only wreckage. But I knew better. That storm had more to give, and this time I would be the one to direct it. I dressed carefully that morning, not in morning black, but in a suit I reserved for important business meetings. If Alana had taught me anything, it was that appearances matter, not for their approval, but for my own power. Then I drove downtown to an office I hadn't visited in years, my lawyer's. I had known Mr. Hughes for decades. He had helped me when I signed the papers to buy my catering business, when I fought to keep my house after Alana's father left, when I refinanced loans to send her to school. He greeted me with the same calm professionalism he always had, but when he asked, "What can I do for you today, Clarissa?" I saw his eyebrows lift at the steel in my voice. "I need to change my estate plan," I said. The words felt heavy, but also liberating. We sat across from one another at the long oak table while he pulled out files, the weight of the decision settling in. My current plan, written years ago, listed Alana as my sole beneficiary. The house, the business, the savings, everything I had built through a lifetime of sacrifice. I had written it when I believed my daughter was my legacy. But after what she had done, I knew better. I watched him cross her name out, and then, carefully, methodically, I rewrote my future. The catering business would go to Vanessa, the only one who had ever understood what it took to build it. My savings and remaining accounts would be split, part of it to Malik, who had defended me when no one else did, and part of it to a charity that fed children in neighborhoods like the one I came from. My house, the place Alana grew up in, would never belong to her. Instead, it would pass into a trust that ensured she could never claim it, never profit from the roof I had kept over her head. With every clause, every signature, I felt a weight lift. "Are you sure?" Mr. Hughes asked gently. "This is a serious step." I nodded. "I've never been more sure." She erased me from her life. Now I erase her from mine. He slid the documents across the table, and I signed. Pen to paper, stroke by stroke, I rewrote the story Alana thought she controlled. She had cut me out of her wedding. I cut her out of my legacy. When it was done, I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel drained. I felt steady, powerful. This revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It wouldn't make guests whisper or spread rumors in real time. No, this was quieter, sharper, the kind of revenge that lingers long after the flowers die and the photographs fade. Because one day, when Alana expected to inherit the fruits of my life, she would find nothing waiting for her. No safety net, no business, no house, no wealth to cushion her fall. Just silence. The same silence I had given her at her wedding. And that silence, written in ink and sealed in law, would outlast every party, every reputation, every broken vow. It didn't take long. After the last of the gossip faded from the Wells estate, and the vendors stopped calling my phone, I knew it was only a matter of time before Alana appeared at my door. Humiliation has a way of humbling even the proudest, and she had tasted it in front of everyone she once tried to impress. The knock came late on a Sunday evening. I opened the door to find her standing there, makeup scrubbed away, eyes red and swollen. She didn't look like the polished bride from glossy magazines anymore. She looked like the little girl I used to hold after nightmares. Except now, I wasn't the one who had chased away the monsters. This time, she had invited them in herself. "Mom." Her voice cracked, the single word carrying all the weight of desperation. I let her in. She walked through my living room like a stranger in a foreign country, unsure of where to sit, unsure of how to begin. For once, she didn't command. She didn't posture. She begged. "Please," she said, sinking onto the couch. I didn't mean it. I was under pressure. Dolores was in my ear. Everyone was watching me, and I panicked. I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have pushed you away. Her hands twisted in her lap. She was crying openly now, gasping between words. The wedding, it was a disaster. Everyone's laughing at me. Jordan's barely speaking to me. And, Mom, I need you. Please forgive me. I sat across from her, my hands folded neatly, my face calm. Inside, I felt 100 emotions fighting for space. Anger, sorrow, vindication. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let tears fall. I didn't shatter. Alana, I said quietly, you made your choice. She shook her head frantically. No, I didn't. I was manipulated. I cut her off, not with volume, but with stillness. You looked me in the eye 12 hours before your wedding and told me I wasn't invited. You didn't whisper it. You didn't stumble over it. You said it clearly. You erased me in favor of people who will never love you the way I do. That was your choice. Her sobs grew louder. She slid from the couch to the floor, kneeling at my feet, gripping my hands like a child begging for candy. I'll fix it, Mom. I'll make it up to you. Just please don't give up on me. But I had already given up, not on her as my daughter, but on the illusion that my sacrifices still meant loyalty. That illusion had died the moment she chose Dolores's approval over my presence. I withdrew my hands from hers slowly. I'm not angry anymore. I told her, I'm not even hurt. I'm done. Her eyes widened, confusion flashing across her face. Done? What do you mean, done? I leaned forward, my voice steady, my words sharp as glass. You wanted a wedding without me. Now you'll have a life without me. She flinched, as though the words themselves had struck her. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't slam doors or raise fists. I simply sat there, calm, dignified, letting her drown in the silence between us. After a while, she realized no amount of pleading would move me. She rose unsteadily, wiping her face with trembling hands. At the door, she turned back, her voice breaking. You're really going to turn your back on me? I met her eyes, unblinking. No, Alana, you turned your back on me first. And with that, she was gone. If the wedding was a disaster, what came after was worse. In their world, appearances weren't just important, they were currency. And once the gossip started, it spread faster than wildfire. I heard it all through the grapevine. Former clients whispered to me. Old catering contacts called with smirks in their voices. Even Vanessa forwarded messages she'd overheard at a brunch. The Wells grand wedding had become a punchline. Guests mocked the empty tables, the bare archway, the caterers walking out mid-event. They laughed about the DJ's crackling speakers, the missing meals, the bride in tears. Some even joked that it looked less like a wedding and more like a rehearsal gone wrong. For people like the Wells, humiliation wasn't just embarrassing, it was fatal. Their social circle thrived on hierarchy, on who hosted the best parties, who built the largest homes, who kept up the strongest image. And now, they were reduced to whispers of incompetence and cheapness. Dolores fought tooth and nail to control the narrative. She told anyone who would listen that there had been vendor mismanagement, that it was the planner's fault, that unexpected glitches ruined what should have been perfection. But excuses don't erase memories, and no one believed her. In their eyes, The Wells weren't victims. They were failures. And Alana, my daughter, bore the brunt of it. Jordan began to pull away almost immediately. At first, it was subtle. He stayed late at work more often, lingered on his phone when she tried to talk, dismissed her with cold, clipped replies. Then the distance grew sharper. When arguments broke out, he no longer shielded her from his mother's barbs. He didn't defend her when Dolores spat, "You've dragged this family through mud." Instead, he just stood there, silent, watching. To Jordan, Alana was no longer the trophy bride who had elevated his status. She was the stain on his name, the reminder of a wedding that would forever be remembered as the one that fell apart in real time. In his eyes, she was damaged goods. I didn't have to be in their home to feel the tension. I could hear it in Alana's voice when she left voicemails I still refused to return. Desperation threaded through every word. "Jordan won't even look at me, Mom. Dolores says I've ruined everything. Please, I don't know what to do." But I stayed silent because my absence had become the longest shadow in that house. Every fight, every rumor, every cold shoulder pointed back to me. They knew it. I knew it. And I didn't need to raise a hand or voice a word. My silence echoed louder than anything I could have said. The Wells family began to fracture under the weight of public scorn. Invitations to their usual gatherings slowed. Friends they had entertained for decades grew distant. Business associates stopped bringing their wives around, afraid of being tied to the embarrassment. Even Howard, who rarely spoke, looked worn and diminished, his shoulders carrying the weight of whispers he couldn't silence. Meanwhile, I carried on with my life. My catering business thrived, my home stayed warm, and my circle remained intact. I walked through my days with a quiet steadiness, knowing that their collapse wasn't an accident. It was the echo of their arrogance, crashing back on them like a wave. And the best part, they couldn't blame anyone but themselves. People expect revenge to feel like fireworks, loud, explosive, a rush of heat and color. But when it finally settles, it doesn't feel like fire. It feels like quiet, like walking into a room that once held chaos and finding only stillness. That's what I felt when the dust cleared. I didn't dance on their downfall. I didn't gloat when whispers about the Wells' failed wedding spread like weeds through their circle. I didn't need to. The humiliation was theirs to carry, and they carried it well enough without my voice. As for me, I had work to do, not with flowers or vendors or frantic phone calls. That was over. The work now was reclaiming what I had allowed them to strip from me, my dignity, my legacy, my power. The estate plan was signed, sealed, and locked away. My name was no longer tied to my daughter's future. Vanessa and Malik would inherit what I had built, and charities that fed children like the one I once raised alone would carry the rest. Alana would look one day for a lifeline, and she would find nothing. Not because I hated her, but because she taught me the hardest lesson. Giving without respect is just bleeding. The house I lived in, the business I ran, the savings I had fought for, none of it would be hers to squander. I cut that cord cleanly, and in doing so, I freed myself. I sometimes think about the Wells estate, its manicured lawns hiding the cracks no one can mow away. I imagine Dolores still pacing, still seething, still replaying the disaster she couldn't stop. I imagine Jordan distant and cold, his marriage already wilting under the weight of embarrassment. And I imagine Alana, caught between them, realizing too late that the mother she erased was the only one who ever truly held her up. But I don't linger there. Their collapse is theirs to live. My story didn't end at their gates. It began again when I walked away. I still run my catering business. I still rise early, still pour coffee into the same mug I've used for years. But everything feels different now. My steps are lighter, my back straighter. For once, I'm not carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I regret cutting my daughter out, if I regret letting that wedding burn to the ground. My answer is always the same. I regret nothing but the years I spent believing love was the same as sacrifice. Because the truth is, love without respect is a slow death. And that night, I chose life. I didn't walk away triumphant. I walked away surviving. And in that survival, I found something greater than triumph, freedom. So here I am, no longer the invisible woman, no longer the fixer, no longer the bleeding heart who paid in silence. I am Clarissa Monroe. I gave everything, and when they tried to erase me, I took it all back. And I will never be erased again.